Now, since we've learned definition of euthanasia, we are now going to move on to whether euthanasia is wrong or right. Since it has been a debate whether to agree or disagree with euthanasia, and the debate has not been concluded, I will only explain on the merits and demerits of euthanasia. Firstly, people agree to euthanasia because they believe that it frees up hospital beds and resources. Let's say there's a patient who is brain dead where his brain is not functioning anymore, but his heart is functioning through the supports of machines. For these kinds of patient, it is better for them to go through euthanasia, so because they have very little percentage to live. This is so that the beds and the resources of the hospital would be given to those who have a higher percentage. Secondly, they believe that it relieves suffering. Let's say there's a patient who is going through a cancer of stage 4 where they have very low percentage of living. It is better for them to go through euthanasia. This is because it will relieve their pain and suffering. It is also believed that by giving them euthanasia, we are allowing them to die in a humane way. Lastly, people believe that a patient has the right to choose. Since in Australia, there is a belief that there is a law which mentions that you are allowed to do suicide. Why not let people go through euthanasia since they are both similar? Now I will move on to the reasons why people disagree to euthanasia. Firstly, they believe that voluntary euthanasia will give the doctor too much power. In 1998, a doctor named Harold Shipman has killed more than 170 of his patients. However, he has not been caught because he covers the murder with their medical reasons. This is similar to euthanasia, since euthanasia gives the power for the doctor to give an option to their patients to kill themselves. This brings us to the second reason for the disagreement of euthanasia, which is the lack of responsibility, whether it's the patients or it's the doctor. For the doctors, they believe that the lack of responsibility will be caused from euthanasia, since doctors can kill their patients to make their job easier, and it could also affect the patients since they can kill themselves for them to not go through pain.
And if you want to understand the complex issue of who has the right to die, you have to start here, because it's this principle of personal autonomy, except in cases where it poses harm to others, that forms its moral and legal basis. In American courts, at least, the possession of that autonomy has become synonymous with the word dignity. And words, terms in this debate have a lot of importance. They frame the way we think of the question of doctor-assisted suicide. In the beginning, it was called euthanasia. In 1938, Dr. Charles Francis Potter, a Unitarian priest and humanist, founded the Euthanasia Society of America, the first group to seriously propose legislation that would legalize mercy death.
Hereby want Jerry Seinfeld to remove my life support, feeding machine, lung blower, etc., etc., etc.
The first victories came in the form of advance care directives, or living wills, and the court decisions were loaded with the language of autonomy and dignity to justify pulling the plug in the case of brain death. And then when the first physician-assisted death laws were passed, dignity was front and center again. Indeed, such laws are often called death with dignity laws. Today, 5 states effectively allow physician-assisted death, and in each, the medication can only be prescribed when certain requirements are met. In Oregon, for example, you have to, among other things, be terminally ill with a fatal diagnosis of less than 6.
Or assisted dying is a controversial issue that has been debated from time to time. And based on the video, some holds the view that this practice of euthanasia is actually a necessity for today's world, as we know that not every single disease is curable. So by practicing this, they believe this is how we help the patient to stop their prolonged suffering time, and they believe, and this is how we put them down. And the concept is like let them die, knowing when they are going to die. So to allow the terminally ill individual to have rights to practice this, okay, in certain cases can be constituted as a human, rational and compassionate choices given to them. And apart from the group who believe that this practice shall be legalized, there are also a certain group who believe that the legislation shall not allow this practice to be given to them. And the concern highlights in this video in relation to the protection of vulnerability can be addressed by ensuring that certain conditions are fulfilled prior to this right to be exercised by the terminally ill patient to have their choice to die in dignity. And among the conditions laid down are first, the patient must be terminally ill, and then they must have this mentally competent, and they must be an adult, and the most important thing is that they must be in severe pain, and all of these conditions must be fulfilled prior to the establishment of rights to be given to them. And if we look at among the countries that legalize euthanasia, and one of them is Oregon, in which in this Oregon they have this prescribed condition laid down, in which a person who would like to establish this right, they have to fulfill all these conditions. And among the condition laid down is that they must be capable of making the decision, okay, on behalf of themselves. And the most important thing is that they must be diagnosed with the terminal illness that will lead in death within the period of 6 months. Otherwise, they cannot exercise these rights. And as mentioned in the video, okay, among the reasons that shows to what extent this practice shall be legalized is sometimes, okay, if we look at sometimes, it is acceptable for the doctors to stop the life-sustaining treatments when there are certain grounds to assume that it is the best interest for the patient. And if the withdrawal of life-sustaining treatment can be said to be of the benefits for the patient, then the death in these cases can be constituted as a morally good for the patients.
I think she called it euthanasia. The nurse was very open about her views on euthanasia, and I believe that she took very good care of my mother at the end.
If the person is going to die anyway, why prolong it? If the nurses or doctors can just give the little extra medication to speed up the process, it is the same end result, right?
Yes, it is the same end result. But if I were a nurse or doctor, I would not want to make the decision to end a person's life. That is murder.
Murder is killing someone who is alive, not easing a dying person's suffering.
I agree that people's suffering should be kept under control, but it is illegal to willfully take a person's life, regardless if they are dying or not.
As we can see from the previous video, euthanasia issue is still being debatable between the one who support it and between the one who against it. So for those who against it, there are several factors. One of them is the ethical issue. Okay, and the first ethical issue is that the sanctity of life. Society views on this issue based on both secular and regular basis, where the life must be protected and preserved and also respected. So for the Christian, sees life as a gift from God, which should not be offended by taking another life. And Islamic faith also says that it is the power of Allah who gives the life and also the one who will cause death. So moving on to the second ethical issue is that euthanasia is viewed as murdered by some society. This society views an action which has intention of killing another person as wrong in spite of their patient's consent. As we know, that for euthanasia there is it's its own procedure whether they have to take into consideration of the patient's consent. And for the last ethical issue that I would like to lay down is that the doctor-patient relationship. We are informed that a doctor's role is to save life and not to end them. Thus, the ethical view on this particular issue is that it will destroy the trust and confidence between the doctor and the patient. The impact of this problem in the future is that the patient will not have confidence on the doctor, and they will and to cure in order to cure their disease. So they might use another ways, for example, the traditional way in order to cure their disease. That's all.
There are two types of euthanasia, which is active euthanasia and also passive euthanasia. For the active euthanasia, Islam fully does not recognize and prohibit the active euthanasia because it's considered as killing, even though the intention is to relieve the patient suffer. Referring to Surah Al-An'am, verse 115, Allah said, "And kill not a soul which Allah has forbidden to kill it but with a right cause." In Surah An-Nisa, verse 29, Allah said, "And do not kill yourself, Allah is most merciful to you." From those verses, active euthanasia is considered an unlawful because the act is seen as killing, which is crime and also sin, thus it is prohibited in Islam. However, for the passive euthanasia, it is an issue that is debatable until now because there are two opinions on it, and the action of passive euthanasia is based on the doctor's confidence that the treatment is not useful anymore and does not give hope to heal the patient. Therefore, the doctor will discontinue the treatment by stopping the respiratory equipment from the patient's body. And there are different opinions, and according to Jumhur Ulama, the cure or treatment is mandub or known as sunnat and not mandatory. And following that the Jumhur Ulama, when the cure or treatment is sunnat, it includes the installing of the respiratory equipment or aids for the patient. And if the doctor has determined that the brains of the patient has died, then the doctors have the right to stop the treatment. Thus, it cannot be considered as sinful if the doctor cannot if the doctor stop the treatment, and the doctor cannot be held responsible for his action. However, it requires the consent of the patient, his guardian, and if the patient does not have a guardian, it is necessary to obtain the permission from the authority. However, for the Shafi'i and Hanafi, they totally reject the passive euthanasia and they do not recognize the passive euthanasia. Thus, in Malaysia, both passive and also active euthanasia, it is totally prohibited and haram.
Euthanasia may seem like the most effective way to relieve pain and to end sufferings. However, we always forget that miracles do happen, and patience is one of the things that define what life is all about. Destroy not yourselves, surely Allah is ever merciful to you. Surah An-Nisa, ayat 29. If there is a will, there is a way. If we keep on having faith in Allah, He will ease our pain, because Allah is ever the merciful. Now, we fully understand that the only thing that a person in pain wants is to end his suffering, then therefore we believe that it is not their fault that the road that they choose to take is to end their life. It is rather our fault for not supporting them. Therefore, those who are healthy and well should be the ones carrying the responsibility of taking care of another people, which is also what life is all about. Now, there are a number of alternatives to euthanasia, such as hospices and home care support. People use the principle of autonomy and throws around the term human rights as justifications for euthanasia without taking into consideration the real situation of a person suffering from terminal illness. The greatest fear held by the dying is not physical pain, but rather the fear of being abandoned by their family and the society. Psychological distress, particularly depression, is a major risk factor for suicide and for requests to hasten death. When the World Health Organization recommends for devoted attention toward cancer pain relief and palliative care before considering loss allowing euthanasia, most patients who request suicide change their minds once satisfactory pain control is established. So these are some of the many examples of the alternatives to euthanasia. Now that we understand that there are in fact other ways that can keep us well and alive, we stand on our opinion that euthanasia is wrong and should never be an option and should never be legalized. Not only because we're Muslims trying to practice Islamic principles, but also because we believe that there is more to life than thinking about how to end it like it is just another story. No person can ever die except by Allah's will and at an appointed term. Surah Ali Imran, ayat 145. We may be the one who writes the storylines of our own life, but at the end of the day, it is Allah who has the right to end it.